and sages who could verily sanctify a place of pilgrimage just by their presence arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey. Purport. When Maharaj Parikshit sat down on the bank of the Ganges, the news spread in all directions of the universe, and the great-minded sages who could follow the importance of the occasion all arrived there on the plea of pilgrimage. Actually, they came to meet Maharaj Parikshit, and not to take a bath of pilgrimage, because all of them were competent enough to sanctify the places of pilgrimage. Common men go to pilgrimage sites to get themselves purified of all sins. Thus, the places of pilgrimage become overburdened with the sins of others. But when such sages visit overburdened places of pilgrimage, they sanctify the places by their presence. Therefore, the sages who came to meet Maharaj Parikshit were not very much interested in getting themselves purified like common men, but on the plea of taking a bath at that place, they came to meet Maharaj Parikshit because they could foresee that Srimad Bhagavatam would be spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. All of them wanted to take advantage of the great occasion. Translation: at that time, all the great minds and thinkers, accompanied by their disciples, and sages who could verily sanctify a place of pilgrimage just by their presence, arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey. So we find here, and of course the next verses gives a list of all the great sages, that this occasion, though it appears to be tragic, because Parikshit was going to leave his body and leave the kingdom in a desolate state with not a good leader. Still, we see that this became a very auspicious occasion because we see that the saints began to gather. And why did they gather? Of course, they could say we're going on pilgrimage and going to bathe, but that was just the plea, that was just the excuse. And as Srila Prabhupada explains in their purport, they actually understood that Parikshit would hear the Srimad Bhagavatam, so they came to hear the Bhagavatam actually. In other words, the sages had great power of mind such that they could intuit the future, and they understood the greatness of this occasion. Of course, it is immortalized in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, in these chapters where we see Parikshit hears the Bhagavatam in the presence of the sages from Sukadeva Goswami. So the sages had an ability to understand the importance of this occasion, and so they all came. It describes here that it wasn't a few, it was a lot of them came, and they came with their disciples, Sasishya, and they were all very advanced, Mahanubhava, greatly elevated, and they could purify the places of pilgrimage, Tirtani Punanti Shanta. So they in themselves were so spiritually advanced that they were greater than the places of pilgrimage to which they were coming, like the Ganga, for instance. So they were very exalted souls. Yet they came to hear Sukadeva Goswami speak to Maharaj Parikshit. So this that teaching of Bhagavatam must be very, very profound and very, very significant, because these were very advanced sages who came here. So the idea of the sages purifying places of pilgrimage is often mentioned in the Bhagavatam. places of pilgrimage are wonderful because they purify us. In the previous verses we saw how the Ganga and the Jamuna were glorified because of their sacred nature, and if people bathe there or live there, they become purified. Not just purified, they advance in devotional service because in one sense the Ganga and Jamuna are non-different from the Supreme Lord, just as the holy name is not different from the Supreme Lord. So they get not just purification, but they get devotional credits and advantage from contacting these rivers and places of pilgrimage. And in fact, we'll see among the first 10 Angas of Bhakti mentioned in the second chapter of Nectar of Devotion that living near the Ganga, etc., Dwarka or the Ganga, etc., is one of the Angas of Bhakti. Very, very purifying. It's in the first 10 actually. So one should live in a place which is very, very sacred and purifying, and this helps develop your devotional service. We don't have to do anything, just to live there, and that's an advantage in itself. And of course we'll see in many Puranas, like the Padma Purana or the Skanda Purana, we'll find great glorifications of pilgrimage places, particularly the Mathura area. In fact, Rupa Goswami's gathered together a whole series of hundreds of verses to glorify Mathura. So it's the Mathura Mahatmya. And that's taken from various scriptures to show the potency of that place. This living in that place, or bathing in the river, the Jamuna at Mathura, or living in the forest, or going to the forest, or just respecting them, or remembering them, or hearing about the glories of those places. It's considered to be very, very devotional. We get a great advantage from that. And particularly, of course, because the Mathura area is the place of Krishna's pastimes, so it's directly related to Krishna. So these are all very, very powerful things in themselves. And therefore, the scriptures have whole sections dedicated to glorifying these places. And we must remember that it was not easy to go to these places in ancient times. You had to walk. As Lord Chaitanya walked over India, South India, it took 6 years of wandering around South India, going to the various pilgrimage places there. And we see the great acharyas like Ramanujacharya. He walked all over India to various places. Then he also went up to the Gandaki River to Muktinath. He went up to Muktinath on the Himalayas at that time when there was no roads. It was very, very difficult. But they walk, go up to this place and walk back again. And Madhvacharya, he went up to Badrinath twice, actually, and down again, up and down on these. There was no roads. It was just like pathways, little rock pathways or something. They would walk and they go all the way up, come all the way down, and go to other places as well. But yet the places are glorified in the Puranas, and people would go to these places. They would trek all these. They would just take a year off just to go to one pilgrimage place and come back again. So we see even in Lord Chaitanya's time, the people of Navadvip, Kulina Grama, they would walk down to Puri to see Lord Chaitanya every year. Take 2 weeks to go down there, 2 weeks to get back, and they would stay for 4 months. Walk down, walk back every year, like this. So pilgrimage place is very, very popular in spite of the fact that it was not easy to get to. You don't just take an airplane or a train or a bus. You have to walk everywhere. So you have to sacrifice a year of time or something, or at least half a year to go to these different places. But people would go to them, and they're glorified like anything. So they had great spiritual significance, and remarkably, the people would get inspired to, take that sacrifice and take all the energy to go to these places and come back. However, the devotees are more powerful and more purifying and more devotional influence. They have more devotional influence than the places of pilgrimage. So it's an easier method of getting the same or greater result by simply associating with devotees. They are the real tirthas, and they can even purify the tirtha places. That is the power of the devotees of the Lord. So the devotees are pilgrimage places, but they're moving tirthas because they walk around. The tirtha places stay in one place. And the devotees walk all over the place, so they're moving tirthas. But they're more powerful than the tirtha places, because as it says there, they purify the tirtha places. They energize those places. So they must be greater if they can energize those places. This is a glorification of the devotees, and therefore, more than going to holy places of pilgrimage, it's better simply to associate with devotees. What is the use of going to all these pilgrimage places? Better you just associate with devotees. So we have statements like that also. And it is also said that though these places are purifying, the effect of the devotee is much more powerful. To purify yourself by bathing in the Ganga may take hundreds and constant bathing. But contact with the devotee has an immediate effect. Very, very powerful effect. So therefore the devotees are not only more convenient because they're maybe close to you, but also very, very powerful in their effect. And of course it's also observed here in the Bhagavatam that the real point of going to a pilgrimage place is not just to take a bath there or whatever, it's to meet the great devotees who are there. So if you combine the two things, a tirtha place with the devotee of the Lord who is there, then you get very, very great effect also. Yeah. So if we go to the holy place like Vrindavan or Mayapur and we contact the devotees there, that's even more powerful than just going to the place itself. If we also have the devotee association there. So in any case, we find that the devotees are more glorious than anything else, even though we can't say that there's no power in the tirtha places. Definitely there is, but the devotees are praised even more. One of the 5 important angas of bhakti is to live in the holy Dham. And that's one. But then the other one is, of course, to associate with the devotees, sadhu sangha. Of course, the other is hearing the name and the Bhagavatam and chanting the holy name and doing deity worship. So it's among the 5 top ones, going to the holy place and living in the holy place. But actually, more powerful is that association with the devotees. So therefore, it is said that if you could not go to the holy places, you can remember the place. Holy places, at least you remember them in your mind. Right? But still, you should somehow associate with devotees. And that should be there. So that is why there's an emphasis upon accepting Guru and getting teachings from Guru, because this is association with devotees. It is through the medium of devotees that we contact devotional service and we develop our devotional service. So therefore there's a great emphasis put upon accepting Guru. So we find that the first anga of bhakti is to accept and surrender to the lotus feet of a Guru. It doesn't say Shiksha or Diksha, it says Guru in general. Second one is to take Diksha and Shiksha from the Gurus. And then the third one is to respect them. And then the fourth one is to follow the path of the acharyas. So you have 4 things involving devotees. The first 4 angas of bhakti. Association with devotees. And Rupa Goswami says of all those angas, the first 20, the first 3 are the most important. So we have to associate. So then again we get this idea of the devotee being very, very powerful to influence us and help us develop our devotional service. So therefore the devotees are the real tirthas. So the tirthas, of course, for many people in this world, they act as counteraction to their sins. In other words, they are atonements or prayaschittas. We committed a sinful activity, we don't want to get a sinful result in a future lifetime, so we run to the Ganga and bathe in the Ganga. We get rid of the result that way. So, like that. So that's most people do think like in that terms. It says purification or cancellation of your bad karmas by doing a good activity. Or you had a sinful thought, you need the Ganga to get rid of the sinful thought, whatever like that. So purifying in that way. And of course, that can also happen with devotees. If you associate with devotees, a type of devotional service, then you can burn up your karmas, etc. But more significant than simply purifying and getting rid of bad karmas and whatever, is that we get attraction for devotion. So this is even more important than burning up karmas or getting rid of your sinful results and suffering, etc. To develop bhakti and then finally prema. So that is the more positive aspect of the devotee as a tirtha. So the devotees can do this, especially because not only, of course, you can associate with them, which is good, but you can get teachings from them, you get knowledge from them. And what is it? Knowledge of Scripture, obviously. And this is very useful for the devotee. It's a type of knowledge, jnana in one sense, or vidya, but it is not the jnana that we condemn in terms of mixed devotion, jnana misra bhakti, which is impersonal jnana, where we simply are interested in Brahman and negating our material body and merging in Brahman, impersonal Brahman. That type of jnana, no, we don't want. But the other jnana is the knowledge of the Bhagavatam. And what is that? The knowledge of the Supreme Lord. Who is that Supreme Lord? What are his qualities? What is his form? What is his beauty? What are his qualities? What are his activities, his pastimes? So this is the knowledge that we need. So this is what the devotees give. So on our own, that's difficult to get. We can't just naturally develop that in most cases, unless the Lord himself personally appears. We can only speculate, who is God? And that's what philosophers do. If they accept God, then they'll speculate about who he is or whatever, and they can't come to any conclusion. But we can get the knowledge through the devotees. And of course, the devotees are depending on the Scripture, so they're delivering the scriptural knowledge and the realization to the person, the devotee or the disciple. Okay. So that's a very important contribution that the devotee gives. He imparts knowledge to the person. Because we are human beings and we have a higher developed consciousness, so we can absorb that knowledge and understand that knowledge. And then we can put the knowledge into practice. So this speeds up the process. We don't have to trial and error, try different things and speculate who is God. We get a ready answer for us, we get ready for it, follow it, and then we get the result. So it's a quicker process with no speculation involved. So this is what knowledge does for the human being. It quickens up the process of advancement. Therefore the devotee is very, very significant in his ability to impart the teachings. In ancient times, it was more or less a necessity that you needed the devotee, because there were no books, and the libraries were not accessible to most people except the king, maybe. Even in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time, when he was in Puri, and he was the magistrate there, the king had the library, and that had all the books in it. That had the commentary on the Brahma Sutras of Baladev Vidyabhusan that nobody had seen in a long time because it wasn't published, it wasn't printed, so it was just manuscripts there in the king's library. He had all these commentaries of the Goswamis and everything in his king's library, but nobody had access to that at that time. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur happened to make friends with one of the servants in the library, and he managed to get copies of those manuscripts, and then he was able to study these things that way. But even Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time, not very available, many of these scriptures. Not commonly available. So the works of the Goswamis were not readily available. Other things were not readily available. What to speak of 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya's time, or 1,000 years ago when Ramanujacharya was there. Where do you get all these things from? So a lot came through. One devotee would memorize everything, absorb it, and then he would teach it to another person. That's how it went on. And that's how the Vedas went on. They were carried on orally, and they weren't allowed to tell everybody. Only certain students they would speak these things to, and they would pass on the knowledge to their disciple, and that's how we get paramparas of knowledge. No libraries, oral knowledge. Of course, later on they wrote things down in palm leaf manuscripts, but these were only in certain places. Kings or wealthy people may have libraries and things like that. Otherwise, not available to the common person. So a lot was held in their minds. So, therefore, the devotees were very necessary in order to impart that knowledge to other people. Because there were no books, there were no bookstores, there were no internet, nothing's there. It's just... and even the libraries were very rare. So, what to do? So it all depended on the transmission through a person. So that says, just by necessity it went through a person, and therefore the devotees were very necessary to distribute the knowledge. But the other point, of course, is that knowledge itself requires a devotee to impart it. Then it is understood properly. So this is a common principle, not just in spiritual matters, even material matters. In India, you have to go through the guru. So, for instance, music. They had, in classical music, they would have a guru, and he would have his disciples, and the disciple would learn, and he would pass on the knowledge. It was nothing written down. If you want to learn a raga and the tals and all that, it wasn't written down in a book. You have to learn from the guru, repeat it, do it. He would observe, he would correct you, and that way you would learn the raga and whatever like that. So that's why they developed different schools, like paramparas, and they would do things in a certain way in one line, someone would do it another way. Not necessarily they're incorrect, but just different. The knowledge is carried down in parampara like that, and you have to get the knowledge from the guru, and he's not going to give you that knowledge unless he thinks you're qualified to, take the knowledge and use it properly. So even materially speaking, they had to have great respect for their teacher and honor them properly, and that way, and understand that the knowledge was, in one sense, to be respected, and it's not something that was commonly available, so they had to treasure that. So what to speak of spiritual knowledge, because spiritual knowledge is a little bit different, because it is not this material skill or intelligence, but it requires also that spiritual insight and spiritual inspiration, spiritual advancement to understand the real conclusion. And we can argue on points logically speaking, but it's kind of a waste of time, because ultimately it's not logical at all. Some things are beyond logic, they're beyond time and space, so we can argue forever on our level of, did this happen like this or did it happen like that? We don't know. Or why is it like this or why is it like that? We don't know. But from a higher point of view, there is no argument. They can resolve it in another way from a higher insight. So this is what the person who has the devotee who has the knowledge and the realization, he can impart it properly to the disciple and help him understand and encourage him to advance. So the scripture is good, that's the knowledge, but it comes through the devotee because the transmission through a devotee has to be there. And therefore, Prabhupada often quotes on this Padma Purana that if the knowledge comes through the mouth of a Vaishnava, doesn't believe in God, then it's like poison. It may be the same words and the same sounds and the same verses and whatever. Doesn't have the same effect. It is a material effect, poison. Won't have a spiritual effect. So, in other words, the knowledge is a little bit subtle. What is imparted is not just the words and their grammatical structure and all that. There's something behind that which is also necessary that the devotee must impart to the disciple. So therefore the devotees are very necessary in transmission of this knowledge and the realization, understanding of the scripture, devotional scriptures. And therefore they have to be respected. So just as the tirthas are respected for purification and advancement in devotion, so the devotees are offered greater respect for their ability to purify and impart devotion to other persons. So they're glorified as the ultimate tirthas, the highest type of tirthas here. So these sages came. Now, all these different sages came, very great sages. And it's also described that even Vyasadeva came, who was the actual speaker of the Bhagavatam. He taught Sukadeva Goswami. He was his father and his guru. He also came. And Narada Muni, the guru of Vyasadeva, he also came. So they were all listening to Sukadeva Goswami speak the Bhagavatam to Parikshit. So they all got a great benefit from the delivery that Sukadeva Goswami gave. So that's why the Bhagavatam should be glorified, because even though it was written by Vedavyas, it was spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. Somehow it developed special qualities coming from his mouth. That's represented in the third verse. Like a mango bitten by the beak of a parrot, sukha. The mango becomes sweeter. It becomes sweeter. So similarly, the Bhagavatam, though it was composed by Vedavyas, when it came out of Sukadeva Goswami's mouth, it became sweeter somehow or other, because of the delivery. So therefore the great sages came, and not only the great sages, Vedavyas and Narada Muni, his guru and his param guru, they also came in to hear this. So very, very significant event taking place here. Okay, any question?
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. Always informative. When devotees set up a similar place as a holy place, of course, like for instance, Srimad Bhagavatam in Mayapur, he set up the Govardhana, etc. So also around the world, devotees, and here we have a Govardhana. So obviously it's potency by remembering those pastimes and places. But I mean, does it actually gain some spiritual potency, like the dams, when you set up a sort of secondary dam in another place outside the dam?
Well, as I said, if you cannot go to the dam, just remembering the dam itself is the same benefit once, because it's not different, the memory of it. So if you establish a place other than the actual place, like Vrindavan with 7 temples or whatever you want there, then of course again, it's not the original, obviously, so it's not where Krishna was born, but because the devotees are there and they think of those Vrindavan there, then it's kind of like we can say it hasn't had the same power exactly, but it has some power to it. Wherever there's a temple of the Lord, again it becomes a tirtha. Because the Lord himself, with the Lord comes Vrindavan, holy Dham itself. So wherever the Lord is in the deity form, then again that's also the place. But of course we have to distinguish between everywhere, and Vrindavan itself is the birthplace of Krishna, and the activity place of Krishna, that has a special potency. Nevertheless, other places still have a great spiritual potency. And they help us remember, even if we cannot go to those places physically.
You mentioned about the 5 angas of bhakti, and you also touched on one of the association of devotees and how we should respect the devotees. I found that by also remembering the other side of, just like we have the Tina things, we hear the opposite, like how to glorify the devotees instead of blaspheming devotees, but also on this side, how you mentioned the 5 angles of bhakti, it's very important also to hear the other side of how we need to be cautious. Sometimes we find devotees come to class just to challenge it, or with the mood like they know better than the speaker, instead of coming with the humble mood. And I've also heard living in the Dham, there's a thin line of material energy, because there are people who live in the Dham who don't really follow and who do nonsense. So sometimes people think, like we may also think, so I think we need to be reminded to be cautious that just because we tick the 5 angles of bhakti doesn't mean that there's so much detail involved. It's like living in the Dham, we follow the practices and associating with devotees. It's not that we gather to do village talk or have pizza and watch a football game, things like that. So thank you for mentioning about the devotees. But you know the difference where it says living in the Dham and there's a thin line, because I've heard devotees in the past say there's a thin line of material energy, so even if someone's living in the Dham, it doesn't mean that they're living in the Dham because they're not really following.
Yeah, well, I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Navadvip Dham Mahatmya, he says that you have to have the right consciousness in going to the Dhamma. And if you're materialistic and you go to the Dhamma, very materialistic, let's say, or offensive, then you're not actually going to the Dhamma at all. It's covered. There's a covering over it, so you're not seeing the real Dhamma, you're seeing some material energy only. Whereas a person who comes with a sincere heart, then he can access the Dhamma. Now, according to the, let's say, the purity of the person, of course, then we can say there's even various levels on which the devotee can access. Just like the holy name, if we're really covered over, we get a little effect. If we're less covered over, we get more effect. And if we have no covering, then we get great effect, like that with any devotional service. So the same with going to the holy Dham. If we're very, very devotional when we come, then we may get very, very powerful influence immediately, a great effect on us. If we're somewhat of a devotee, then we have a little bit less influence. And if we're completely negative and offensive, then of course it's nothing, zero. Just like chanting the holy name with offense, no good result. So the same with the offensive person, materialistic person who comes only to make profit out of the people that are in the Dham. Then that person is not a Dhamvasi or whatever. He lives in the Dham. He's not even living there. He's living on top of the Dham and it's separate from him.
So on the point that you mentioned about deity worship, there's also the 2 important things about deity worship is punctuality and cleanliness. So that requires cooperation, and sometimes we think that only it's our service and we don't consider that there are other pujaris doing service, and sometimes we find that we may also tick the box of doing deity worship, but then if you don't cooperate with the authorities and you kind of also affecting other pujaris, and that also, as you mentioned, the potency is different of getting the benefits of performing devotional service.
Yeah, I think in all these processes like deity worship or even chanting the holy name, the important element is that we have to, behind following all the principles, the rules as such, is that we are trying to develop a relationship with Krishna of service, a pure service, that we're doing this for Krishna to please him. If that's there, then I think all the other things will gradually fall into place. The rules and the interaction with other devotees, etc., will naturally be able to adjust themselves if we have that principle behind it. If we take it as a job, or we take it as just a bunch of rules that we have to follow, then we may not, and we don't have that devotional attitude, then, because it is more or less a materialistic attitude, then we may have more problems in relating with others or management or whatever. But if we do have that sincere devotional attitude in our service, then that will help to adjust things in all levels.
I was thinking about this point here, mentioning that in previous times that they had to walk through the places of pilgrimage. I was just thinking about that, what we said, like ancient times, that people had to walk, but it's like even more ancient than people had like we hear in the Mahabharata, like they had like, I don't know, mystical powers or powerful animals, like arguments, horses.
Yeah, well, even Krishna went on his chariot and he took a whole bunch of sages with him when he went over. So they went instantaneously, like this, to another Mithila or somewhere else when they went there. So they could do that, but not ordinary people.
Yeah, not everybody could do it.
Yeah, it's mystic. They go to the Vimana or something, the airplane, or. And we see here the sages. They just appeared. They didn't have to walk. They just manifested themselves. Mystic power.
I think in Dwapara Yuga, there's great conveyances for most people also, probably.
Probably, yeah, they would have obviously more advanced than us.
Yeah. So when we speak of like ancient times not being very advanced, it's more like the times where like Kali Yuga began, and in between like this downfall and then like modern technology.
That's to make up for our degraded condition where we can't travel at the speed of the mind. And we need computers and jet planes and all things like that because we can't keep everything in our mind and calculate at the speed of a computer. But in ancient times, everything was in the mind, more or less. They could travel at the mind speed, they could calculate and store things in their mind like that. So this is the modern inventions are simply a crutch for the people who have no abilities.
I'm just trying to clarify because there's like a common understanding that like ancient times means like forevermore in the past of human history. That was like...
This is more or less what I'm talking about is only the last 5,000 years or even 3,000 years where we see that, suddenly Kali Yuga approaches and Vedas have to be divided up by Vedavyas 5,000 years ago because one person couldn't hold all the Vedas in his mind, so he gave it to 4 different people to do. So he divided Vedas into 4 parts, and that started the different sakas of the Vedas, the 4 Vedas out of that, because one person couldn't hold everything at that time. And then, of course, later on, then they had to start recording things on manuscripts. And then after that, of course, along with that, we get everyone having to walk around everywhere rather than go at the speed of the mind. Like Vedavyas didn't have to, he was in the Himalayas when Sukadeva was in the womb and wouldn't come out. So he didn't have to walk all the way to Dwarka. He could just go at the speed of the mind and bring Krishna back there at the speed of the mind also.
Usha and Aniruddha also, she was traveling through, her friend like traveling through space.
Yeah.
In relation to a few verses before, Srila Prabhupada explains how, according to Jiva Goswami, Maharaj Parikshit was not sitting in the Ganges.
He was the Jamuna.
Sitting in the Yamuna because they geographically.
Yeah.
And then when I was reading that, I was thinking something similar to what Giridhari said, that maybe in Dwapara Yuga,
He could travel like that.
he could travel.
Well, it's possible. Yeah, he could.
Because also I don't know if it's like verses after, it's clearly said Ganges.
Mm-hmm.
No? I don't know if you know the verses after, it says from the feet of Vishnu, which means the Ganges, and also one verse after, it says Ganga.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering from a technical point of view, if it's written Ganges, why Jiva Goswami will say no, it's the Yamuna?
Well, yeah, then of course he said because it's closer. It was closer to that Hastinapur. And secondly, we glorify the Jamuna because it's where Krishna had his pastimes, and therefore it's even more sacred than the Ganga.
Yeah, no problem with that, but
Yeah, so those are the reasons.
explaining where the Bhagavatam was recited. The verses are explaining where the Bhagavatam was recited, and it says clearly the Ganges.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
just, besides that, we believe that the Yamuna is unholy.
yeah.
But besides that,
Well, anyway, that's his preference to take it that way. Okay. Hare Krishna.